Brandon. Today we begin our commentary article. The title of this article is Can We Reduce Suicides? Have Faith. And this is a serious subject, but it is one that needs to be discussed. And so I have two panelists here to help me discuss this article. First, welcome back to the program, Gabe.
Hey everyone, and Brandon, thank you for inviting me here.
Yeah, it's good to have you back here, Gabe. And we also have David Morton back with us. Welcome back, David.
Yes, hello. Good to be back.
All right, so we are talking about reducing suicides. Gabe, this is an important subject to talk about, and, we're not experts, obviously, on this subject, but we can at least bring the subject up and offer help. Actually, one of the most important things I think in this article, if you are struggling with this, and we'll mention it more later, there is a sidebar there at the bottom of page 10. If you know someone struggling with suicide, please pay attention to that information. It's an important subject, Gabe.
That's right. And like you said, we're not the experts, but actually, I'm sure even as we were preparing this lesson, I was thinking four people came to my mind that I knew personally that have committed suicide, and varying levels of relationship to me. But after something like that happens to somebody that you know, a friend or family member, a thought that occurs to you is, well, what could I have done to prevent this? Or could I have showed a little more love or built a closer relationship or something like that? And I think that's a natural thing to think. And so I'm glad that we're addressing this issue in our lesson today, because I think a lot of people have these thoughts when they encounter something like this, when their friend or family member commits suicide.
That's true. And oftentimes we don't want to talk about it, right? We want to kind of brush it under the rug, or we don't want to bring it up because it's not a fun subject to talk about. It's not an easy thing to talk about. But sometimes, I think oftentimes, David, we actually need to be talking about these kinds of things because we all struggle with something, and we need to be talking about our struggles more.
Yeah, and I actually, Gabe, it's terrible here. There are four people in your life. I've had some people in my life as well. The one that I remember most is a kid in high school who was a friend of mine, and it was one of those things where, he seemed like a happy guy. He had some things he was looking forward to. He had he wasn't the best student, but, he played music really well, and everyone really liked him. So when he committed suicide, it came as this huge shock. And I think that's why we need to talk about it, is because it's not always something that you can see on the surface. It's something that sometimes people are struggling with quietly, and maybe not even at those moments when you're around them. Maybe it's at those times when they're alone, and that's when they really start struggling with this. And if we don't talk about it, then we don't know how to really address the deeper issues happening in our own lives and in someone else's life.
Very good points. Also, we don't always know what people are going through. So that helps us to stop and treat people with respect, right? And instead of doing the opposite, we can choose to treat people with honor and respect because we don't know what people are struggling with. Actually, I think many times we would be surprised to know what struggles people are facing. And so we can be a source of encouragement for people rather than kind of causing more pain. Now, Gabe, you mentioned something, you asked yourself a question, could I have done something? And the truth is, we can help, but the burden doesn't, it's not all upon us, obviously. We ask ourselves these kinds of questions. We can try and do our best, but I guess the burden doesn't lie on maybe any one person, right?
Yeah, I think you're right about that. It's sometimes we do put a lot of pressure on ourselves for certain things. And again, I think that's just kind of a natural response to certain situations. And as our lesson is going to talk about, you're right, it's not just about one person. It's about having faith, as our title indicates, but it's also about having a community. And again, these are things that won't necessarily always, prevent a suicide from happening, but they can help.
What I think is important here is bringing up the subject and talking about it. And I think that's what we can all benefit from. Whether it's this issue or another one, let's just be more vulnerable. I was recently at a conference, a kind of a retreat, and there were so, many people there, and they were so vulnerable about the issues they were facing, and I found that very refreshing. And I think that's something we can all learn from, is to share with other people our struggles, and we can share with each other and learn from each other and help each other. Well, we are on page 10, so if you have your magazine, I invite you to open it up as we have our first reading for today.
Can we reduce suicides? Have faith. The answer to tragedy may be closer than you think. Some recent celebrity suicides have sparked much discussion about depression and mental illness. There was, however, little talk of spiritual health. That's unfortunate. Even as the suicide rate rises, a growing body of research testifies to a positive relationship between faith and mental health. The help so many need may be as close as the nearest house of worship.
Well, we have heard about various celebrities who have committed suicide in recent years, and this has kind of sparked a discussion. David, what does it mean when something sparks a discussion?
It means that something has happened that has gotten a lot of people talking about a particular issue.
Well, so a celebrity brings up a lot of talking points, right?
Oh, for sure.
See that in the news. They know who they are famous. And so, Gabe, if a celebrity commits suicide, that kind of puts that subject on the table, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think about a couple of years ago, I don't know if we discussed about mentioning names here, but I mean, Robin Williams is so famous, and he was somebody that people saw as a comedian, bringing life and humor and joy to people, and so it was really a shock hearing about how he had committed suicide, and of course that sparked a lot of discussion about this idea. The lives of celebrities, the private lives of celebrities, are they the same as what we see? Of course, nothing is ever as it appears on the outside, but in a case like his, wow, it's like a comedian,
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good point. You may not expect that from someone who's making you laugh all the time, but on the inside, they are hurting. And so that, again, is an important reminder of why we should discuss this topic, because anyone could face this. No one is beyond this. Facing this kind of struggle, you never know what struggles you're going to face. There was, however, little talk of spiritual health. We learn in the next sentence. Spiritual health, it sounds kind of vague. David, what are they referring to?
Well, they're referring to whether or not a person is in a position in life where they feel spiritually secure, where they feel spiritually plugged in to a community of people that's feeding them in a more meaningful way, right? So there's a lot of talk about, whenever there's a suicide, people talk a lot about the superficial issues. They'll say, like, oh, this person had a great family. Oh, they were really successful. We had a lot of those celebrities who've killed themselves, committed suicide in recent years have been, a number of them were musicians, right? Most of them were successful musicians. If you know the band Linkin Park, the lead singer committed suicide. Chris Cornell. Yeah, he was another very famous musician, also committed suicide. Successful musicians. So we talk about like, oh, they were successful, they had families, they had this great legacy and all this stuff, but no one really talks much about like, okay, well, what were their thoughts on the afterlife? Did they have hope for the world beyond this one? Did they have hope for what to do when they felt like they were suffering or struggling with their humanity? People don't talk about those things.
So success isn't the answer, right? There's something deeper that we need to look at, and that involves spiritual health. And the writer here says it's unfortunate that we don't talk about spiritual health when it comes to suicides. Even as the suicide rate rises, a growing body of research testifies to a positive relationship between faith and mental health. Now, Gabe, we've heard reports from time to time that, for example, those who pray, maybe live longer or something like that. And I'm not sure how they do those studies, but you do hear those from time to time. But here's another link between faith and mental health.
Yeah, sure. And earlier in the lesson, it talked about depression and mental illness, and then now the idea here is that there is a contrast between the things that the world has to offer, like counseling and psychology and things like that, and certain prescription drugs or medication to help you with your situation. And here is a contrast, and that is faith, something that, like you said, might seem kind of vague, or it might seem abstract or ambiguous to a lot of people, but it's a real thing, and there's a real tie between someone's faith and mental health.
All right, so the help we need may be closer than we think, as close as the nearest house of worship. Another word we may use for this would be what?
Would be church.
Right, yeah. A lot of times we would just say church. This is it's a broader term, right?
Yeah, I think maybe the author left it kind of broad because they were being inclusive of maybe a Jewish synagogue or a Muslim mosque or something like that. Those can all also be a place of community, which is something that this article talks about. But yeah, like you said, David, the first thing I think of as a Christian is church.
Yeah, and I feel like community is absolutely essential for people being able to live meaningful lives. But I think that one of the things that makes the tie between faith and mental health so strong is because faith is really, it's like having help from the outside, right? You yourself can be your own worst enemy, right? The people around you who are trying to help you, sometimes they can have trouble understanding the things you're struggling with as well. But if you are praying, right, like as a Christian personally, right, when I pray, then I'm asking for help for not just someone more than human, but the one who made me and the one who made all of humanity, who surely will understand me.
Right.
So there's this connection there that's even more rich, I think.
So it is important to have a good community. That's one component. But what this article brings up is faith, which brings up the question, put your faith in, or what is your faith in? And that connection is what really makes the biggest difference. And so next we're going to talk about the strength in numbers. There's really a strength in numbers. That's a good phrase to know as well. So join us as we go to our next reading for today.
Strength in numbers. Dr. Aaron Cariotti, author of Dying of Despair, argues that rising suicide rates and many other societal ills can be traced to increased social fragmentation. Social fragmentation can damage our emotional and mental health, but faith and faith communities can be a powerful force for connectedness and nurturing a sense of belonging. As John Stonestreet of the Colson Center has observed, one of the characteristics of regular church-going is that it increases social ties and strengthens already existing ones. While career success is often depicted as climbing a ladder, personal success may be envisioned as building a web of healthy relationships, each adding spiritual, emotional, and mental strength. Few people are better situated to help build these relationships than local religious leaders.
All right, social fragmentation. What does it mean, David, when we talk about something being fragmented?
If you take a sheet of glass, it's one big piece of glass. And then you drop it on the ground, and then it shatters into different fragments.
Very good.
Right? Something is broken apart and not together.
So we're talking about social fragmentation. This is a disconnect, a social disconnect, and that is a problem. And, if you are lonely, you can suffer from suicidal thoughts. for example. Right?
And I think that this is something that a lot of people struggle with at different points in their lives, or struggle with. I mean, what it means is like it happens to people. Maybe they feel like they're disconnected from society in certain ways, or at different times in life. And so it's a feeling, the social fragmentation, and what the feeling that results is something that I think probably 99% of people could relate to.
I think just about everyone can. I would make the argument that everyone can. I mean, I would at least 99%. You know, because this social fragmentation and the loneliness that accompanies it is not something that's reserved for people that are visibly lonely.
Right.
You know, that loneliness that makes people want to, think about why they're alive and whether or not they should just end it. That's something that can happen to someone who is visibly lonely, like doesn't have any friends, or someone who feels alone in a crowd, someone who's actually highly social, but doesn't feel like they are really connecting with the people that they know.
So we can all probably relate to loneliness. Maybe you're not in that state right now, but at some point in your life you have been, and maybe in the future we will feel that, or just maybe some days of the week we feel that. Whatever the case may be, what can we do, panelists, when we are in those situations? And of course, not really talking about, it's Wednesday afternoon, I feel a little lonely. Well, we all go through that, but I think an extended period of loneliness is the key issue. What can we do in those kinds of situations?
Right. And so, and I think that's why it's important to keep in mind strength in numbers. Then, so it's not just talking about, okay, I'm lonely, like you said, Wednesday afternoon, I'm lonely right now, I'm going to find 3 or 4 friends and go and hang out. Okay, well, that's great for that time, but if you don't have a steady, maybe a regular meeting with those friends where you're open and vulnerable with them, then those relationships can just be very surface level, and it might not help. And so I think the point is to be in a committed relationship with some other people, not just one, but a group of other people, and you can get that, or you can find that in most churches.
All right.
Yeah.
David, any other thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you want to really, the most benefit you're going to get is if you're in a group of people where you can be vulnerable with those people, where you can be open with those people, where you are held in some way accountable, meaning, like they're checking up on you in loving ways. They're saying, like, what are you doing these days? How are you feeling? What kind of things are you going through? Are those things that you were struggling with, are you making any progress? To have that active community with people that cares about more than just doing events, but more so about like, how is your daily life going? That's where the benefit comes from.
And another thing about that is because I've known people who are struggling with depression before who have tried to find a place where people can pour into their lives and maybe help them. And I've seen them come around and be the ones that are helping the other people in the group. Because at first, sometimes, yes, you might go in thinking you need help, but it's also important to realize you're contributing to this relationship as well, and you're helping other people. They need you as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So some key words we are seeing here is community. Are some key words that we are seeing. We have community and we have vulnerability. Right? What does it mean to be vulnerable? And I think of having that heart-to-heart connection. Gabe mentioned we can talk on a surface level, but we need to go deeper. I think that will help us connect more, and that will feed us and hopefully, give back to the person that we're talking to as well. It's an exchange being made there. So social fragmentation, we learn in line 16, can damage our emotional and mental health. But faith and faith communities can be a powerful force for connectedness. Anyway, and nurturing a sense of belonging. Basically, what we were just talking about, right? Get connected and you can receive some of the things that you need in life. And then we meet someone else here. Who do we meet next, David?
We meet a man named John Stonestreet from the Colson Center. And he observes that one of the characteristics of regular church going is that it increases social ties and strengthens already existing ones.
All right, so when you go to church, you meet people, and that strengthens social ties. What does it mean, Gabe, it strengthens already existing ones.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has their relationships, that they already have, that already exist. And so the relationships that you have will become even stronger. And I think a key word of this sentence is probably the word regular, because it's okay, like I said, to go one time and you get something good often out of going to church once, but a regular church going will increase and strengthen those social ties.
We've talked about success. David, you mentioned this earlier. Our next paragraph, revisit that concept. Career success is often depicted as climbing a ladder. Sometimes we are trying to get to the top of that ladder, so to speak, and we're climbing it, and we're so focused on that. But that is not as fulfilling as we think it is, David.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing about the point that the article makes here, it talks about career success and personal success. I feel like oftentimes in our world, career success and personal success become really confused as like the same thing. People will see their personal success in life and they will grade that based upon where they are in terms of their career success. So then their entire life becomes focused on this, how can I get more, respect or more power within my, in my career.
Yeah.
And what that does is that drains you dry.
Yeah.
And eventually you start to lose track of who you are and what you're even meant to be doing on this earth.
You're not really focused on your heart. You're focused on this outward.
Right. Yeah, you're
success.
forgetting about relationships, you're forgetting about community, and you're just about how can I get more money, more position, more da-da-da-da-da.
So career success is depicted in this way. There's a picture that we see here of climbing a ladder. We often see that when we're talking about career success. And then we have personal success. And how may we envision personal success, Gabe?
Well, I think it comes down to the person. It's a personal, how you define success, that will be your idea of personal success.
Some people view it as building these healthy relationships.
I think that's important, but like David said, you could have your personal success mean your career success. And so that could be bad for your life. Whereas if it is more like about your relationships, how you're helping people, contributing, I don't know. It's a good exercise to think about it, what it means for you. What is personal success to you?
Right.
Because it should develop a true happiness, not something that makes you discontent or depressed.
Some examples they give here, of course, as we just talked about, the healthy relationships, and then also what about the spiritual, emotional, and mental strength? Those are all things that are important, and sometimes we neglect these areas. Well, few people are better situated to help build these relationships than local religious leaders. And so again, at maybe your local church, the pastor there can help you, but also having that community definitely can be really helpful. Well, counseling can also be a very useful tool when it comes to many issues that we're facing. So in our last reading for today, we'll discuss the topic of counseling.
Counseling. Faith-based counseling has some inherent advantages. Many people resist seeking medical treatment for depression due to the lingering stigma attached to mental illness. They may feel far more comfortable seeking understanding and compassion in a house of worship rather than a medical facility. A sense of the transcendent may also serve as a final barrier against the fear of life, overcoming the fear of death. The more distant we grow from one another, the more likely we are to break down, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, and physically. We should not underestimate our need for one another and the power of faith to give the vulnerable hope to face their struggles.
So there's counseling, and then there's faith-based counseling. For example, maybe a pastor at a church would sit down with you and talk about your struggles. That would be faith-based counseling. Now, I think all kinds of counseling could benefit you. There are people who are trained, and we definitely recommend that. But faith-based counseling could be an option, and some people feel maybe more comfortable with that, Gabe.
Yeah, some people aren't as comfortable because they know, okay, maybe the person is going to be talking a little bit about God, and maybe the person doesn't believe in God. However, everybody has a worldview, and the thing with faith-based counseling is that the Bible does present a pretty complete picture of our state as humanity, our psychological state. It's very understanding. God created us. He knows how we work. And so when a pastor takes that angle and helps somebody, it is really helpful, and has proven really helpful for a lot of people.
Well, David, why do some people resist seeking medical treatment when it comes to depression?
A lot of people avoid treatment because there's a lingering stigma, which basically just means society looks at people with mental illness like they are sick, like there's something wrong with them. And historically, there's a desire to separate them from the rest of society, because instead of helping them, which would be a lot of energy or whatever, they just want to separate them away so that just, oh, these weirdos are over here, and we can keep on living our normal lives over here, right?
Well, some people do feel more comfortable sitting down with a pastor, for example, rather than going to a counselor at a medical facility. But at any rate, we just encourage you to seek out help with whomever you feel comfortable with someone who can actually provide the help. But I think the point of this article is bringing up the idea of faith and God, and how that is a very important component in all of this. And, we would like to suggest even the most important factor in overcoming this struggle. And that's what the next paragraph is talking about when it refers to a sense of the transcendent.
Yeah, sometimes we use the word transcendent to talk about God. Okay, so somebody who's outside of our world, who has a very objective, perfectly objective point of view, but who also comes into our lives. Okay, so that's what it means to transcend, and transcend different barriers. Okay, and that's what we believe about God as well, is that He didn't just stay outside, but He also came to the earth to live as a human. So, like you mentioned earlier, David, He does understand us more than anybody.
That's right. And our last paragraph before we go today reminds us that we need people. And if we grow distant from others, then we may break down mentally, emotionally, and so on. And so we should not underestimate our need for one another and the power of faith to give us hope. We cannot